What does your inner monologue sound like? Is it full of affirmations like, "I got this"? Or is it more like a relentless barrage of self-doubt, saying, "Oh, I am so stupid," or "I shouldn't have done that"? Sigmund Freud, a German neurologist, proposed that humans are driven by two forces, the life drive and the fear drive, or the death drive. The death drive, later named Thanatos after the Greek god of death, is what pulls us towards self-destruction, sometimes through actions like smoking, binge drinking, or even self-harm. While Freud's theory isn't widely accepted today, it laid the foundation for understanding why we sometimes spiral into self-destructive thoughts. Let's take a look at 6 destructive thinking patterns that are holding us back and keeping us from moving forward. Subscribe and like before we proceed, can we? Chapter 1. The voice in your head. Have you ever noticed how your thoughts sometimes feel like a crowded room? Voices arguing, mocking, or hissing you fail? Where does this shadow come from? And why does it sabotage you when you need clarity most? A 2019 study in clinical psychological science found that people who engage in self-critical thinking activate brain regions associated with emotional pain, the same regions triggered by physical injuries. Your own thoughts can wound you as deeply than a knife. Ancient Stoics called this phantasiae, impressions that crash against our reason. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Yet, even emperors grappled with inner chaos. Modern psychology offers a parallel: intrusive thoughts. These unwelcome mental guests don't define you, but how you engage them shapes your life. A 2017 study in cognitive therapy and research found that people who label these thoughts as passing clouds, observing, not clinging, reduce their emotional grip. Stoicism echoes this. Don't be deceived by the bark of your mind. Stand as the watcher, not the storm. Consider a musician before a performance. Her hands tremble, her mind whispers, they'll laugh. A Stoic might ask, what is within her control? Her practice, her breath, the notes she plays, the crowd's reaction, irrelevant. Epictetus said, "We suffer not from the events, but our judgments about them." Each self-attacking thought is a judgment, a story you choose to believe. But what if you rewrote it? Psychologists call this cognitive diffusion, separating yourself from harmful narratives. Imagine your critical voice as a stranger on a bus. You hear their rant, but you don't buy a ticket to ride along. This isn't denial, it's discernment. A 2021 study in mindfulness showed that individuals practicing this detachment reported 30% lower anxiety. Stoicism takes it further. Your mind is a fortress. Why let invaders occupy the walls? Here's the truth, you are not your thoughts. The mind will say many things, some helpful, some harmful, but you decide which to believe. Here's the paradox. The shadow grows when you fight it. Acknowledge it. Say, "I see you, fear, but I choose action." Seneca wrote, "Brave men rejoice in adversity, just as brave soldiers triumph in war." Your inner critic isn't an enemy. It's a misguided ally, warning you of perceived threats. Thank it. Then redirect its energy. Mastery begins when you stop wrestling the shadow and light a torch instead. Ask yourself tonight, which voice will I amplify? The one that binds or the one that builds? The answer isn't in silencing the storm, but learning to dance in the rain. Chapter 2. The Comparison Trap. You scroll through social media and it's the same story every time. Someone just bought a house. Someone else got a dream job. Another person is traveling the world while you're sitting in the same chair, staring at the same screen, wondering where you went wrong.
Why does everyone else seem to have it all together while you're stuck in the same place?
It's not just envy. It's the sinking feeling that you're falling behind, that somehow life is slipping through your fingers. This is the comparison trap, and it's as old as human nature itself. Social psychologist Leon Festinger's social comparison theory explains that we compare ourselves to others to evaluate our own worth. It's a survival mechanism. In the past, knowing your place in the social hierarchy meant the difference between life and death. Today, it just means endless self-doubt. The problem isn't comparison itself, it's who we compare ourselves to. Social media amplifies this by presenting a highlight reel of other people's lives. You don't see their struggles, their insecurities, their failures. You only see the curated moments, the best angles, the perfect lighting. And against that illusion, your reality will always seem inadequate. But ask yourself, who are you racing against? What does falling behind even mean? Life isn't a straight path. It's a chaotic, winding road where timing is irrelevant. Marcus Aurelius put it simply, don't waste time worrying about what others do. Do what you must and let nothing distract you. If you let comparison control you, you will always feel behind, no matter how much you achieve. But if you focus on your own progress, small, steady, relentless, you'll realize there was never a race to begin with. So next time you catch yourself measuring your life against someone else's, stop, look at your own path, and keep moving forward. Chapter 3. The Judgmental One.
Have you ever caught your reflection and winced? Not at your face, but at the voice that snaps, weak, flawed, unworthy. We judge ourselves with a cruelty we'd never dare aim at others. Where does this merciless court in the mind come from? And why do we keep returning to its bench?
Stoics called this proshoche, vigilant self-awareness. But vigilance without wisdom becomes tyranny. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Yet, when those thoughts are poison, we stain ourselves." Modern psychology names this maladaptive self-schemas, rigid beliefs like, "I'm a failure," that warp reality. A 2020 study in Journal of Cognitive Psychotherapy found that 73% of participants' negative self-talk stemmed from childhood labels: lazy, difficult, disappointment, absorbed as identity. Stoicism asks, who owns the brush painting your soul? Picture a sculptor chiseling marble. Each strike of, "you're not smart enough," or "they'll leave you," cracks the stone. But what if you paused and asked, is this strike true? Is it useful? Epictetus taught, first say to yourself what you would be, then do what you must. Self-judgment becomes self-sabotage when it replaces action with paralysis. Psychologists call this rumination, a loop of self-attack that feeds anxiety. A 2023 meta-analysis in Clinical Psychology Review linked harsh self-criticism to increased cortisol levels, literally etching stress into the body. Stoics countered this with premeditatio, not fearing failure, but preempting it. If you wish to endure life, prepare for death, Seneca wrote. Prepare for imperfection, but don't weaponize it against yourself. Try this, tonight. Write a letter to your 15-year-old self. What harsh words did they hear? Now, write back as the Stoic mentor you needed. You are not your mistakes. You are the fire that outlives the ash. This isn't self-indulgence, it's recalibrating your inner dialogue. Marcus Aurelius journaled to confront his shadows. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Your existence is not an error to fix, but a craft to refine.
Ask yourself, would I let a stranger speak to me this way? If not, why permit it in your mind? The mirror doesn't lie, but the mind can warp its glass. Polish it with reason, not shame. Chapter 4. Rejecting Compliments. Let me guess, you fear compliments? While most Sigma men brush it off like it's cringe and he didn't need it, of course accepted in his mind. But someone who literally feels uncomfortable or shy on compliments is a negative thought patterns. For Sigmas, their internal locus of control is so high, they don't need external praise. So it's all about mindset.
The Stoics had a simple approach. Truth is truth, regardless of feelings. If someone praises your work, it's because they saw value in it. If someone admires your character, it's because you showed strength. To reject that isn't humility, it's self-deception. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." If you're putting in effort, if you're trying, then own it. Someone tells you that you did a great job. Your first instinct? Shrug it off. Oh, it was nothing. Someone compliments your appearance. Nah, I'd look terrible today. It's automatic, almost like a reflex. You reject the compliment before your brain even processes it. But why? Psychologist Guy Winch suggests that low self-esteem is often the reason we struggle to accept praise. If deep down, you don't believe you're good enough, then a compliment feels like a contradiction. It clashes with your internal narrative, creating what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable tension between what you believe and what you're being told. Instead of adjusting your self-perception, you dismiss the compliment to restore balance. But there's a cost. A 2019 study in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found that people who frequently reject compliments tend to remember negative feedback more than positive reinforcement. Over time, this shapes how you see yourself. You become someone who can't recognize their own strengths. So, the next time someone gives you a compliment, pause. Resist the urge to deflect. Just say, "Thank you." Accept it as truth, because maybe, just maybe, they see something in you that you've been too blind to recognize.
Chapter 5. Paralyzed by the what-ifs.
You want to start a new skill, a project, a change in your life, but instead of action, your mind fills with hesitation. What if I fail? What if it's too hard? What if I make a fool of myself? You sit there, frozen as time drifts past, but have you ever asked, what if you succeed? You aren't alone in this. Fear of failure isn't just an emotion, it's a conditioned response. A 2018 study in motivation and emotion found that people who experience failure early in life often developed avoidance behaviors. They hesitate, procrastinate, or give up before they even try. Psychologists call this self-handicapping. You create barriers, real or imagined, to excuse yourself from failing. The result? You never really start, so you never really fail, but you also never grow. The Stoics had no patience for this paralysis. Epictetus reminded his students that the greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it. To them, hesitation was pointless. Either act or don't. Just don't waste your life standing in the doorway, debating whether to walk through, because hesitation feeds on itself. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. Picture a blacksmith forging a blade. The first strike is hesitant, the second more certain. By the 100th, the hammer falls without thought. Mastery isn't built in a moment. It's built in repetition, in showing up despite doubt. A 2020 study in psychological science found that people who focus on process over perfection are more likely to persist. Stoicism echoes this. Control what you can. Your effort, your discipline, not the outcome. So, whatever it is you've been delaying, start. The first step won't be perfect, but perfection isn't required, only action. The weight of fear lessens with motion. And if you fail, good. Failure is proof that you tried, and trying is already more than most will ever do. Chapter 6. The Fear of Change. Have you ever felt trapped, knowing you need to change but gripping onto the familiar like a sinking ship? Do you tell yourself, "I'll start tomorrow," only to watch tomorrow dissolve into years of the same stagnant patterns? Change is unsettling. Even when we know a situation is harming us, the idea of stepping into the unknown feels riskier than enduring the pain we've learned to live with. Psychologists call this status quo bias. The tendency to stick with what we know, even when it's clearly working against us. The mind, in its desperate need for security, prefers a miserable certainty over an unpredictable possibility. A 2022 study in Frontiers in Psychology found that people who resist change often experience heightened stress and regret. Ironically, the very thing they fear, failure, discomfort, instability, is already embedded in the stagnation they refuse to leave behind. In other words, By clinging to the familiar, they are actively choosing suffering over growth. The Stoics had no patience for this illusion. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events, but from our perception of them. Change itself isn't painful, our resistance to it is. The mind turns discomfort into suffering by labeling it as something to be feared rather than something to be mastered. Think of a house on fire. You can either run into the unknown or stay inside because at least you recognize the walls. But here's the truth. Comfort is not safety, and familiarity is not happiness. The only way forward is through. Ask yourself tonight, what are you clinging to out of fear? And if you let go, what might you finally become?
The video is kinda over. Thanks for watching. Now let's reflect on toxic thought patterns. Let these words sink in your subconscious. Your mind can be your greatest ally or your cruelest captor. It whispers doubts, compares you to others, judges your worth, rejects praise, and fears change. But here's the truth: none of these thoughts are absolute. They are phantoms, illusions that only hold power if you submit to them. The voice in your head taught you that self-criticism can wound as deeply as any blade. Yet, thoughts are just thoughts, mere noise, unless you choose to believe them. Stand as the watcher, not the storm. The comparison trap revealed the futility of measuring yourself against others' curated lives. There is no race, no scoreboard, only your own progress. The judgmental one exposed the self-imposed trial you put yourself through. But the judge is flawed, the verdict meaningless. Instead of condemning yourself, chisel your identity with reason and action. Rejecting compliments showed that refusing praise isn't humility, it's self-deception. Others see your worth. Maybe it's time you do, too. The fear of change explained why you cling to the familiar, even when it stifles you. Comfort is a cage disguised as safety. Growth demands discomfort. Step forward or remain shackled in place. The only true battle is within. You are not your thoughts, nor the fears they bring. The world moves forward, with or without you. Will you stand frozen, or will you step into the unknown? Hope you've liked this video. We have another one for you. Just click on the screen. Thanks for watching.